I will go ahead and get us started. Thank you all for joining here today. This is our February Best Practices webinar, and we thought it would be timely to talk about advocacy. And actually, I was looking back at our webinars, and just a year ago, we were also talking advocacy. And really, this is quite timely because we are actually going to be at the Capitol this afternoon. And I know that given weather and school and things, that a lot of people can't make it to the Capitol, but we wanted to talk about things you can do from your desk or from your program locally that makes an impact both locally and at the state level, and of course at the federal level too. A little bit about our snack, because we do it every year, so be thinking about participating next year if you can. We bring advocates to the Capitol with kids, hopefully, if they can make it today, to talk to legislators just about the impact that programs are making locally in their districts. And it's not a lobbying activity, which we'll talk about today, the difference between lobbying and advocacy. But it's a chance for people to come to the Capitol and speak to their elected officials about the importance of after school and what kind of impacts you're seeing on youth and families and the community back in their district. And I'll reiterate this throughout the webinar today, but
you're doing a webinar today? Okay. I know.
Be sure to mute your lines, please.
Tell you. We are meeting for Family Fun Night this week, so I was hoping, just kind of on my mind, these kinds of things. Would maybe like to touch base maybe next week. Start talking about what would our logical next steps be as far as planning for next year, after school stuff, or at least getting another.
Great. Sorry about that. I just muted everyone's line. So as you have questions or want to engage in the topic today, just be sure to unmute your line. A little bit more about the snack. We bring together advocates to talk to their policymakers because, and I'll reiterate this throughout the webinar today, our policymakers really want to hear about what's happening locally so they can make the best decisions at the state and other levels for their constituents. So it's not a burden to be reaching out to legislators. It's not a burden to share information from your program with legislators. They like to be in the know, and they need to know what's happening locally so they can make the best decisions at the state, local, or federal levels for their constituents. So what we'll talk about today is defining advocacy, but also talking about the difference between advocacy and lobbying, because I know a lot of people are sensitive to lobbying. And then I want to talk about what is not lobbying. So what are you able to do in an unlimited manner? And then we'll talk advocacy activities or education activities, what you can do from your desk today, steps to effective advocacy, so what you need to do in preparation for those advocacy activities, and then more about what you can do today. So that's what we're going to talk about today. First off, the difference between advocacy and lobbying. And really all you need to know is that advocacy is unlimited. You can advocate as much as you want. Advocacy, in fact, is extremely important to our political system and making the best decisions for our constituents, and you can do it unlimited. The difference between advocacy and lobbying is that lobbying is around a specific legislative proposal, so something specific to legislation. And then there are other rules around electioneering, so supporting a particular candidate. We aren't going to go into that, but if you ever feel worried about doing something like that, I would look into the rules around electioneering as well. But really, if you're asking a legislator to act a certain way or vote a certain way on a specific proposal, that is lobbying. Advocacy is just supporting a cause or supporting a policy or program. So when we ask you to talk to legislators and ask for their support for after school, that isn't lobbying, because after school is not a law, is not a proposal. It's just a general ask. So it's just asking for their general support of before and after school program and summer programs across the state. A few things that are not lobbying. Education is not lobbying. This is just telling legislators what you do, essentially. And again, I'll reiterate this again, it's so important to educate our policymakers on what's happening in their community and what impacts you're seeing, so they can make the best decisions for you. What is also not lobbying, and there are no restrictions on it according to the IRS, are public communications explaining how a legislator voted on a specific issue or candidate position. So you don't need to worry about just saying to families how a candidate is positioned on a specific proposal. But one thing we do caution is that you remain nonpartisan, so you can avoid electioneering or any perception of electioneering. So if you, and this is probably rare for your program, you're probably going to do more education with policymakers. But in case you want to get involved on expressing where candidates stand on positions, we always recommend telling people about what both parties' candidates are, how they stand on a particular issue. So for instance, if we do some caucus advocacy around after school, and we ask candidates to take positions on after school policy, what we would do to avoid electioneering and looking like we're preferring one candidate over another is share all of the candidates' positions on a particular proposal, both Republican, Democrat, Independent, all of the candidates for that particular. And then any public communications that do not include calls to action. So a call to action would be if you're asking parents, for instance, to contact legislators with a particular policy, that could be construed as lobbying. If you don't have a call to action and you rather just want parents to advocate generally in support of after school or 21st century programs, that's not considered lobbying. So you have quite a bit of freedom in the kinds of communications in the world of policy. But today we're going to focus on education and talking to policymakers specifically. Here are some examples of advocacy activities. So activities that can educate policymakers on particular issues. First is the most obvious, contacting legislators themselves. And one message that you might send is thanking them for their work on children's issues. And no matter who your legislator is, they're, regardless of what committee they're on at the State House, every issue impacts children, from food to ag policy to public safety. But there are some obvious direct connections to children's issues, such as school funding, which they've just passed at the legislature, and investments in childcare. So those are a few examples. But obviously, the most direct advocacy or education activity is contacting your legislator. Other ways to educate policymakers are through media and letters to the editor or op-eds or earned media stories. I know a lot of you have very good connections to your local papers, and if you have TV stations, you have good connections to TV stations. Policymakers pay attention to print and other media, and so the more education you can do through these outlets, the better. Letters to the editor and op-eds are especially effective because they allow different stakeholders of your program to express their support for your program. A letter to the editor is usually in response to a story that was run. Op-eds can be more open, but should be timely. An example of how to make after school timely, we're always gearing up for summer. So I always use this example when we're getting to summertime, is talking about how parents sometimes struggle to find care or programming for youth over the summer. What does your program do to help working parents in your community? Or what do you have to offer, and use it as a marketing opportunity as well? And op-eds usually are authored by higher level stakeholders. So if you have a particularly influential member of your advisory board, that would be a good person to submit an op-ed. You can co-author an op-ed, and a letter to the editor is usually easier to get into the paper, and it can be authored by anyone. And it's especially effective when you have many letters to the editor from many different people submitted to the paper. Another example of advocacy activities is just your basic outreach to local elected officials. This can include the mayor, the city council, and others that have an interest or make decisions that impact your program and you. So be thinking in your day-to-day how you reach out to local elected officials, because they're really important to support for your program. They make a lot of decisions that either directly or indirectly impact the youth you serve or your program. So it's really just like state policymakers, they need to know about what's happening in their community in order to make effective decisions. Another example, social media is huge. A lot of people are monitoring social media. I know a lot of your programs have really active pages, which is great, where you show people what kids are doing every day. This is a great way to keep your program front and center with policymakers and others that need to know about your program and the impact you're making. Don't use social media just as a place to post pictures about what you're doing. That's important, but sprinkle in there some data that you're seeing from your program, whether that be literacy improvement or some particular social and emotional learning activities that you're doing. Sprinkle in some data as well, or some more information among those pictures, so you get that additional chance to educate. Something that will, especially with the caucuses coming into Iowa and all the candidates that are coming to the state, there will be a lot of town halls and coffees with candidates and elected officials. Show up. A lot of life, like Woody Allen said, is just showing up. This is true for these events where, especially now, early in the caucus season, the candidates are taking questions from everyone. So this is your chance to get out in front of these potential policymakers, these really influential people in our political system, and get the issue of after school and summer programming into their discussion or debate. State legislators as well often have coffees or other forums or other events on the weekend or on Fridays. So be sure to show up at their events as well. This gives you a chance to interface with them directly, educate them about what your program is doing, and ask them to take a position on after school or summer programming. How do they feel about the state investing in after school? Or what did they see as some policy strategies to make sure that more kids have access to programs? Put them on the spot. That's their job. Ask them the hard or the softball questions. Develop relationships with them, and when the time comes to make hard asks, they know you already and trust you. And then finally, one of the most effective activities you can do, and something that's not too hard to do, is do site visits with policymakers. This can be anyone from the mayor or city council members to state elected officials, your state legislators, and potentially presidential candidates. If you really want to get some good media attention, get a presidential candidate to come to your site. That's a great way to inject after school and summer programming into the conversation at the federal level, and it trickles down to state and local policy too. If they see that a presidential candidate is interested in after school or childcare or vulnerable families that you're working with, the state legislators pay attention to that as well. So it's really a twofer. But I would, to start with, I would focus on your local and state elected officials. All you have to do is ask, and be sure that you offer to invite media, because this is a chance not only for them to learn about your program, but also to get some media attention too. This is your chance to get media as well. So take it as an opportunity, not just to educate the legislator, but also to get some attention for your program. And I have a feeling that kids would really love to see TV crews or other important people at their program, and prep them to ask questions of the policymaker. Get them to engage with the legislator. It becomes very interesting. I had a program once come to the Capitol and prepped their kids to ask questions about anything in their life that they were interested in. And this happened to be a high minority program, and a lot of them asked about immigration. Now, it's not a state issue all the time. Immigration is more of a federal issue, but it got kids engaged in the policy process and gave them agency over engaging with the process. Focusing now on the caucuses, like I had said before, this is a great opportunity to get some media coverage for your program, and also self-interestedly from the Iowa Afterschool Alliance's perspective, to get after school into federal national discussions on supporting working families. You see now that this is very timely in that there are a few candidates that have been talking about childcare specifically for working families. Elizabeth Warren is one candidate on the Democrat side that has come out with a full-blown proposal for universal childcare. So, you know, that's a big proposal that has gotten a lot of buzz. So it's natural that other candidates would be fielding questions about childcare and working families as well. Again, the presidential candidates, they're coming to town, and they're coming to small and large communities with voters. So take advantage of events now where they're smaller and it's much easier to get to candidates. We're early in the caucus cycle, so there are a lot of candidates doing a lot of events, A lot of them are small, so you get more of a chance to interface with the candidates. Right now, they're Democrats. Down the line, Republican candidates might be coming out. Trump is obviously the forerunner for the Republican ticket, but you never know what could happen during caucus and primary season. So right now we're seeing Democrats out on the campaign trail. It could expand later. Be prepared with a question for the candidates, because they do have that opportunity now, or you do have that opportunity. Have a question prepared that makes them take a position on after school. Don't let them out easy. So a question such as related to working families in your community. You can talk about, here in Olwine, for instance, we have a lot of working families that need childcare and after-school programming so they can be productive at work. What is your position on federal funding or federal support to programs so kids can have access? Something like that, where you bring in the local tie-in. It's very hard for them to just brush off a question that is tied to local needs, because they want to make an impact on the local electorate. So they want to be seen as caring about your local issues. Then finally, since you have this opportunity, get them on record and share with your friends on social media. You don't have to express your support for the candidate, but just say, look, this candidate was talking about our program here today. How exciting. And you can put a disclaimer saying, I don't necessarily support this candidate, but look at what they're talking about. Take a picture with them, or if you can and you don't feel that awkward, get a video recording of them saying their answer to your question. This is all a great way to further educate policymakers down the different levels on after school. So some steps to effective advocacy. First is getting to know your audience, and this takes some time, a little bit of research. If you have a few targets for legislators or candidates, it's a little bit easier because your research pool is more focused. You can find your state legislators via this link, and you just put in your address, either of your program or your home, and it takes you to your senator and representative. It's very nice. You can see some information on the website, the General Assembly website, regarding their committees. Their committees are their areas of policy focus. So they're going to have more interest in those issues because they have more influence at the legislature over those issues. However, if you have a few targets, it doesn't hurt to go to their campaign website or their caucus website. So either the House Democrats or the House Republicans, they often have more detailed bios for these legislators. And you never know what kind of information is available about their background where you can make a connection. So for instance, there's a legislator out of Fort Dodge who I do believe he has come to, he's now on education committees, but before he wasn't, but he was a foster parent or is a foster parent. So we know that we can make that connection with children's issues with this legislator because of their background. And they like to talk about things they're passionate about. So while their committees might not get them that excited, they're just doing their research on policy in that area, their backgrounds for their job, their day job, or or their families or their church might be an in for you to start that conversation. Know your goal. Is it to get them on record on a position? Is it just to educate them about your program? Is it to get them to visit your site and say yes to your invitation? Have a goal in mind before approaching your target. That way you know how you want to guide the conversation. And then finally, what's really useful is developing your elevator speech. And I'm going to show you our advocacy guide here in a moment. It's a great resource for developing your elevator speech. Essentially, what an elevator speech does is hone your message so you get across your main points in just a few, either a minute or less. It's a great way to introduce yourself, talk about your program and the major impacts you're making, and end with your ask. So I'll show you that resource here in a moment. So what you can do today, and what we're asking of you to do today, is simply what takes 2 minutes, is write each of your legislators an email about the importance of after school in your community. Talk about the impacts that you're making on kids. Talk about how you're supporting working families and how your community needs your program. Not making an ask around a policy, but rather just educating them on your program and its role in the community. And then your ask can be inviting them for a site visit. Know that they are off on Fridays, so they usually come home for the weekend, and they're often very busy with legislative activities at home. So they might be doing a forum or a coffee, and they might have time to come by for a quick visit on Friday. So be sure to say, I know you're going to be back home on Friday. Why don't you stop by our program? We have this going on. You can help read to kids, or you can play along in our games that we're doing. Your ask can simply be the site visit. And this, like I said, is our most powerful tool because legislators can see the program in action and can see how much of a difference you're making. It also gives them a chance to meet people at your school or at your site, the director or the principal of the school. Be sure to invite your superintendent if you know that the legislator will be on site. This is their chance to meet with parents if they're there at the right time, or if you can get some parents to be there. This is a chance for them to engage with their constituents, essentially, and talk about how great after school is for the community. What takes a little bit more time, but you can still do today, is make plans to visit the Capitol at some point during the legislative session to speak with your legislators in person. We are based out of Des Moines at the Iowa Afterschool Alliance. We're happy to come to the Capitol with you. So I know that likely this afternoon doesn't work for your schedule, but you're welcome to come to Des Moines at any time and talk to legislators. They love to see their constituents up at the Capitol. They make time to talk to you because you're ultimately making the decision on whether or not they get elected or not. So they're going to make time for you. And believe me, they much more prefer to talk to their constituents than lobbyists. So you're a welcome sight at the Capitol. And something else you can do today that takes a little bit more time, you can find scheduled coffees, town halls, these candidate or legislator events in your community. Sometimes newspapers track candidate events or legislator events. If you know your legislators, which I would recommend you do after this webinar, is just find out who your legislators are if you don't already know. They sometimes have a website, or like I had mentioned before, their caucus, the Senate Democrats, the Senate Republicans, the House Democrats, and the House Republicans, they often maintain calendars as well. Or if you're just stuck or you don't have time, let us know at the Iowa Afterschool Alliance. We're happy to do that research for you if you're going to actually attend an event. And before I go to the resources that I have posted online, I just want to reiterate that we're always available to talk about these activities. We're happy to talk through some communications, or if you want to do a site visit and a legislator has said yes, we're happy to help plan that. And even if it works out in our schedule, we'd love to attend too. So this is our contact information. Hopefully you know it anyways through the 21st Century Network. But let me show you the resources that we have, that I have posted to the 21st Century website. So let me see here. Yes, it looks like, hopefully you can see the advocacy guide. Let me try this again here. There. We have developed an advocacy guide a few years back, actually, when Gracie Bransgard was here. We put this together, and we have printed guides as well that you can use as a workbook. So if you go through this and you really want, it's quite a few pages to print out. Well, it's not too many, but if you want a printed copy for a workbook, please just let me know. We're happy to send it your way. But it goes through a lot of what we talked about today. This is also a great resource to use with your advisory council or your advisory group if you want to mobilize them for advocacy and they're not quite sure what to do. This is a great resource to give to them. So it talks through a lot of what we talked about today: advocacy activities, crafting your message. So this is where we get into the message mapping, which is just a way to identify what your main points are for your message. And then developing an elevator speech. So we go through that process with you. We talk about sharing your story through letters, social media, and earned media. And then information on meeting with legislators. I know that meeting with legislators can seem really intimidating. It shouldn't, although I still get intimidated sometimes, especially when they're in a rush and you have to get your message out really quickly. But they're regular people just like us. They've just done a campaign and won a seat to go to the Capitol. They work at the Capitol for about 5 months, 4 or 5 months, and then they go back to a day job. So they're just like us. And again, they need to know what's happening locally so they can make good decisions. We talk about the legislative process so you can understand where are the best touch points to influence legislation if that's your goal. And then we talk about the importance of follow-up. So when you do make a connection with a legislator, it is really important. If you don't have all the information they're seeking, be sure to follow up with them. And so we've put some tips here about that. And then finally, because we feel site visits are so effective with education and advocacy, we've included a step-by-step guide for you. So we include the invitation, what a schedule might look like, invitations for people that should be there in addition to the legislator, and reaching out to media, as well as a day of checklist. One other resource that I have posted on the 21st Century website is this general tips for working with legislators. It's just more tips on interacting with legislators because we know that it can be intimidating. So again, the importance of doing your homework and checking on what their background is, what their committees are, just areas where you can make those connections easily. Keeping in touch, it doesn't hurt to put them on your newsletter list because they are in district. The activities of your program should be of interest to them. So include them on your newsletter list. I would contact them first if you have regular communications and just say, hi, I'm a constituent. I run this program that's really important to our community. I'd like to put you on our email list. Is that okay? The importance of being consistent and reliable, and we usually are, but sometimes it helps just to reiterate these points. Giving them credit, they love recognition. So if they've done, if you know of policies that they have voted in support of or have taken public positions on certain issues, be sure to thank them, either in person or publicly. They like that recognition because usually they don't get that kind of attention. It's usually for the bad stuff. So be sure to give them credit where it's due. Again, showing up at their events is important. If you are particularly interested, you can volunteer on their campaign. That's a huge way to be influential with a particular legislator. That is something you do on your own time, of course. But if you want to be particularly influential yourself, help out on their campaign. That's huge. And then use your connections. Your school board members or your advisory council. You might have some pretty influential parents too. Use them to connect with legislators. And then share your successes. Not only does the Iowa Afterschool Alliance want to know about your successes with legislators and other policymakers, but be sure to share on social media that the legislator was at your site, or that you've talked to a legislator and this is what they said. So get the word out. Let people know that this legislator or that legislator knows about your program. Not necessarily that they hold this position on a particular policy, but just that they're interested in the program and they're keeping up to date. Well, that's all the information I have to share with you today about advocacy. I hope that you will take some time today at your desk, if you don't plan to come to Des Moines today, to contact your legislators at the Capitol and say, I can't make it today at the Iowa Afterschool Alliance event, but I'd love for you to attend and talk to those that are there. And please come for a site visit sometime, either on a Friday or if you have any other time outside of legislative session. I hope this was helpful for you today. I hope it gets you excited and a little bit more comfortable for advocacy. Advocacy and education of our policymakers is so critical to our cause and to the success and support of your programs. So I hope that you will consider this important enough to take on some actions today or the rest of this week. Any questions about what we've talked about today? Most of you are on mute, so if you have a question, be sure to take yourself off mute, or you can write it in the chat. Great. Well, I'll consider that no questions. So thank you all very much for being here today. I have posted all of this, and I'll post the recording on the 21st Century website under the Best Practice Webinars. thank you for your commitment to after school and advocacy. And again, I'm always free to talk about education and advocacy at any time. So thank you all very much and have a great day. Stay warm and stay safe once we get the next snowstorm. I'm sure it's inevitable. Thank you all very much.